Hey everyone, welcome. We are Dave and Ashley Willis, and we have the privilege of talking to you today about one of our favorite subjects, and that is marriage. We just believe that when we get marriage right, it makes every other part of life just stronger and better as a result, and that's the way that God created marriage. We're going to learn today what He intended for marriage to be, why it's important, and we're going to talk specifically about what love really means in the context of marriage. And you probably see this giant chalkboard next to me that says love is patient, from the start of one of the most familiar passages ever written about love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning in verse 4 says, love is patient, love is kind. It goes on from there. But that love is patient part is so difficult in our fast-paced society, and so much of what makes marriage great, it takes time to develop. That's some of what we're going to be talking about. But first, I want to just real quickly introduce who we are. Not that this is about us at all, but just so you know who these random people are talking to you. Sweetie, why don't you tell them a little bit about who we are?
Absolutely. We're Dave and Ashley Willis. We met about 15 years ago. We met in college, and well, I guess more than 15 years ago, because we've been married about 15 years, and we have 4 boys. And life is as crazy and beautiful and nutty as that sounds with having 4 boys in the house. But one thing that Dave and I both have in common is we have a passion for helping others have stronger marriages. And we believe it helps us have a stronger marriage
Definitely
as well. You know, marriage it's just under attack today. It's hard to stay married in this day and age. And we really believe that by looking at God's Word and by using practical tools that we have right at our fingertips, we can have the marriage of our dreams. And that's why we go around and talk about marriage online. We do retreats and conferences all over the United States. And we just really have a passion for telling others how to make marriage, their marriages stronger.
Absolutely, and it's a privilege to get to do that. For those of you who are connected to us online already, thank you for your support and the message that you send. We're honored to be part of your journey. And for those who aren't yet, thank you for taking the time to watch this and invest in your marriage. And so quickly, with the time that we have, we're going to go over 4 keys to building a stronger marriage. And I think there are probably more than 4 keys, but I think if you'll implement these into your relationship, you're going to see some instant results. The first one is to make communication a daily priority. And a Bible verse that goes with that might not seem like a communication verse, but one that I think is a brilliant verse about communication, is Genesis chapter 2, verses 25, which says, when God created marriage, the man and the woman were both naked, and they felt no shame. And I love that verse for marriage because that picture of nakedness, it paints a picture of vulnerability, of transparency, not just physical nakedness, even though that's a big part of marriage too, of course, but it's about saying, I've got nothing to hide from you. I'm going to share everything in me. I'm going to share all my thoughts, my dreams, my hopes, my fears, and I'm going to encourage you to do the same. And in that mutual vulnerability and mutual transparency, we can experience such intimacy. So, sweetie, how can we communicate better in marriages?
Well, I think it sounds like something that should be really easy, right? I mean, communication, you're like, that's just talking, right? That shouldn't be so hard. But the funny thing about that is it's probably the hardest thing that couples fail at doing today. And I'm talking about us too. We really struggle with this in the beginning of our marriage. Because, you know, if you think back when you were first dating your spouse, you could not find enough hours in the day to talk to each other. You would stay up till 2 a.m. talking on the phone or spending time together, and you just could not find enough time to spend together. And then you get married, and you're excited, and you're in your honeymoon phase, and you're still trying to really spend time talking to one another. And then all of a sudden, life happens. And you have children maybe in the mix, and you have a demanding job, and you have family, maybe extended family who's vying for your attention, and friends that maybe are not married yet, and so they don't understand that you can't spend as much time with them. And before you know it, everything and everyone else is taking your time and your attention, and your marriage is put on the back burner. And when that happens, we just stop talking to each other. You know, we might do what I call shop talk, where we talk about where are you taking the kids today, and what do we have on the agenda today, what's for dinner, but not really talking about our hopes and our dreams and the things that really make us tick. Yeah. And the bottom line is when we stop talking about those deeper issues and what's really on our mind and our heart, we really are failing at communication in our marriage. And then it starts breaking down. And sometimes in really bad circumstances, we might look outside our marriage to fill that void of connection that we're so longing to fill with our spouse. And so that's why we just constantly talk about the importance of communication. And we remind ourselves of this as well, because that is the connection point for a husband and a wife, is that daily communication. And it takes making it a priority, because if we don't prioritize it, everything and everyone else will kind of take the front seat in our lives. And so we've really got to make daily communication a priority. And that means setting time aside each day to talk to one another. Maybe it's
with no distractions.
With no distractions, right?
Yeah,
With
you
no
gotta
cell phone
turn
right
the stuff
there.
off, the phone's off, and
Exactly,
really talk.
exactly. And and I just want to say this too. It's really hard to trust your spouse when you don't really get to have their complete attention, at least at some point in the day. Like if your spouse is constantly distracted and constantly on their phone, and maybe they're even acting a little bit, suspicious with their phone, it's really hard to trust them. And so it's really important that we spend that time, that uninterrupted, completely focused time, to look in one another's eyes and actually talk to each other and listen to each other.
And do it consistently and
Yes.
get into that habit. Because when we don't, when we put each other on the back burner, we get what I call a cable company marriage. And I call it that because you ever notice that it seems like every cable company gives you their very best at the beginning of the relationship. And then like 12 months in, they pull the rug out from under you and you're like, okay, all the rules are changed now. The price is up, the service is down. And you think, wait a second, what happened? I thought you cared. I thought we had something special. But they're like, no, that's only for our new customers. That's what we do to win people. And we do that same kind of backward mindset in our relationship sometimes. We give the best of ourselves at the beginning when we're trying to win that person's heart, and we're staying up late into the night talking, we're being thoughtful and romantic, and we're doing all the right things. And then as time goes on, we're so quick to get into this rut of being on autopilot and giving each other our leftovers instead of our best. We were around a couple named Harold and Louise, one of the sweetest, happiest couples I've ever been around. They'd been married for over 50 years, and they were like two teenagers in love. At the time, Louise was in a wheelchair. She had some physical difficulties, but even as he pushed her in that wheelchair, and they were wearing matching shirts, it was the cutest thing that night that we met him. They just loved each other, and they were best friends. And so I had to ask him, I said, guys, what is your secret? I mean, we want what you have someday. What's the secret? And she very wisely smiled and said, well, it's not just one secret, but I'll tell you a big part of it. She said, it's consistency. And this is what that looks like in our marriage. Said on the first month anniversary of our first date, Harold brought me a rose. And I said, what's this? And he said, well, it's been 1 month since we've been dating. It's been the best month of my life. And I just want you to know that I've loved spending this time with you, and I'm excited about what the future might hold. And the next month rolled around, the 17th of the next month. And she said, well, what's this? It's another rose. He said, well, now it's been 2 months since our first date. And time went on. Well, they got married. And Louise said, after I got married, I expected the roses to stop. It's kind of like the chase is over. The guy's got me now. The romance is going to stop. He's just going to be burping his way through the alphabet. Every time he sees me, he's never going to send me flowers again. She was braced for that. But sure enough, on the 17th of that first month that they were married, he brought her another rose. And he said, I bet you thought I'd forget now that we were married. He said, but there's no way. I want to celebrate every moment with you. And then with tears in her eyes and a big smile on her face, she looked at her husband and she looked at me. And she said, it's been 688 months since our first date. And he has never once forgotten to bring me a rose. And I felt like the biggest jerk in the room because I'm thinking I've never in my life done something that sweet or romantic for that extended period of time. But it challenged me. It really challenged me to think about what are those habits that I am implementing that consistently, because really it's our habits that shape every part of our life and our marriages as well. It's our habits. What are those daily things, those little things of carving out time for her, to giving the best of myself to her, to having the kind of marriage that when my kids see it, they want to be married someday, instead of looking at mom and dad and thinking, I don't want any part of that. I mean, what are those habits that we are creating? And it takes everything that you said. It takes consistency. It takes turning off the phones, prioritizing, giving each other the best. And that leads into our second point, which is supporting each other in everything. Book of Ephesians, chapter 5, which is a great description of how a home and family should work. I encourage you to read that whole chapter. One part of it, it says, each husband must love his wife as he loves himself, and wives must respect their husbands. That this harmony of love and respect, this partnership must exist. And we describe it as like a marriage should be like two wings on the same bird. The husband is one wing, the wife is one wing. Christ is the head, and we're working in harmony. And if the husband and wife aren't working in that kind of partnership, the marriage will never get off the ground. So, sweetie, what does it look like to love and respect and to be in partnership and to support each other in everything?
Well, I think it's being there for each other in good times and in bad. And this is part of our vows that we say on our wedding day. And I want to share a story with you about how Dave has done this for me. And it's something that I feel like many of you may be even dealing with today, but you maybe haven't talked about it before because you're too ashamed. And what I'm talking about is anxiety and depression. In the early years of our marriage, I started feeling depression, not really knowing it, just feeling unlike myself and not wanting to do things that I normally would find, exciting to do, and just, that feeling that you just can't shake, and you kind of feel like those cheesy commercials on TV about antidepressants that show a dark cloud following a little man around, and he just can't shake the dark cloud, and it really is like that. You just feel so weighed down by something, and you can't really describe it, but it feels heavy on you, and it makes you sad, and then you start to believe lies about yourself, that you're not good enough, and that you're damaged goods, and that you maybe did something to deserve this, and that's really where I was. And then I got pregnant with our first child, and after I had him, I noticed that I wasn't happy like I thought I would be, and I kind of counted it as baby blues, and then it lingered, and I went into a full-fledged postpartum depression, which led into a 4-year battle with depression and anxiety mixed in as well. And there were many nights where I couldn't sleep, and I would feel physically ill. I would wake up sweating. I would cry and cry and cry. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm on the other side of this, and one of the only reasons is that Dave, throughout that process, was right there with me. All those nights that I woke up saying I can't sleep, and why would you stay with me? I'm damaged goods, and I'm really not exactly fun to be around right now. I have this terrible thing I'm dealing with, and I just can't shake it. And I would just go through all these emotions, and I would wake him up in the middle of the night and just say, Dave, I know you're not going to stay with me, and I'd have all these fears. And he would always look me in the eyes, and he would say, Ashley, I love you just as much, if not more, on our wedding day, like I did on our wedding day, and I am never leaving you, and we're going to get through this together. And I can't tell you how much that helped me. And if it wasn't for Dave giving me that kind of confidence and being that person in my corner, that rock that I needed during that time, if it wasn't for Dave and for my faith in God, I would have never gotten through this. And because of Dave, because of his support, I was able to go and get help. And for me, I had to go on a short-term antidepressant, and sometimes that's what you need to do. And I share that openly because there's often a stigma attached to that. But the reason I share all this is because as spouses, we are supposed to be that rock, that person in our spouse's corner when they are weak. And those were years where I was feeling so weak, and I could not have stood by myself if Dave had not been there saying he would not give up on me, saying that he would help me find the help that I needed, and following through with those things. And I'm happy to say that through my faith in God and through the support of my husband and through counseling, I was able to get through my years of depression, and I haven't dealt with it in many years. And I want to share that story because I feel like it paints a beautiful picture of how a spouse is supposed to be there for a spouse when they are weak. And that's exactly what Dave did. He didn't kick me while I was down. I hear so many stories from the people that I'm connected to online. I get these messages from spouses saying that they're going through cancer, or they're going through a depression, or they're going through a really rough time, and their spouse literally is out of the picture when it comes to support during that time. And I just share this because I want to tell you, spouses need to be there for each other more during the hard times. We've got to be that close person that is there to catch the other when you fall. That's why we're spouses. We vowed to be each other's best friend and to have each other's back right in the moments when we need it the most. And so I share that story because that is exactly what Dave did for me during that time.
Well, and it's not just me being there for her. There have been so many times when she's been there for me. And one of the things that Ashley has said, which I think is not only a brilliant quote, but a great description of how marriage should work, is when you said a strong marriage rarely has two strong people at the same time. It's usually one spouse being strong for the other in the moments when the other is weak. It's taking turns being strong for each other. She's been strong for me more times than I've been strong for her. One of the times that she was strong with me, something I share openly about because we've just found so many people, especially men, are having this same struggle, is a time in my life that I brought on a struggle that was my own fault. Her depression is something that happened to her through no fault of her own. She supported me through a struggle that was through my own poor actions and poor judgment, and that was the struggle with pornography. I was one of the 95% of American teenagers who was exposed to porn before 18. It just put these impressions in my mind I couldn't shake loose, and even though I knew as a Christian what Jesus said about lust, to look at a woman lustfully is to commit adultery in your heart, and to objectify women is wrong. I knew all of that, but it's like mentally knowing it wasn't enough. This sin just had a grip on me. And in our culture, it's so justified. It's everywhere. You can't, it's just everywhere. And I was having such a hard time breaking free from it. But I believed the lie that one day I'll be married and then I won't be tempted ever again. Victoria's Secret ad will come on and I'll be disgusted even by that because I'll be just so into my amazing wife that I'll never, ever, ever have a lustful thought. But the truth of the matter is that lust does not go away nearly that easily. Even though I married the most beautiful woman on earth, the love of my life, it isn't about that, because porn doesn't train your mind to be content in a healthy relationship. It actually warps your mind to never being able to really achieve true intimacy or true contentment, and it just sends you down to a very dark place. I couldn't break free from it, but I also couldn't be honest and courageous enough with her to tell her that it was a struggle. So we got married, and I thought by willpower alone, it won't be an issue. It hadn't been an issue for a while. I thought that I had it in my past, and sure enough, about a year into our marriage, that temptation came back. It took me by surprise. I fell right back into that same sin, and I kept it in secret now, because I thought it would devastate my poor young wife, and she would think I don't love her. She can never find out about this, and I'm just going to stay away from this, and I'm going to do it with willpower. And any time that we try to do something alone, it nearly always backfires, especially when we're living in secrecy. And I had this secret sin that I wasn't looking for accountability. I wasn't looking for any help. I wanted to do it on my own. And that is where I got myself into so much trouble. And I wish I could tell you I had the courage to confess this. I wish I could tell you I had the courage to come clean about this. But I had to be caught. She had to see on a computer, my poor, sweet, amazing wife had to see with her own eyes where I had been. And she was devastated, not only because of what I'd been looking at, but because of the secrecy and dishonesty that had broken her trust and her heart at the same time. And that caused a long process of rebuilding trust. We learned that forgiveness and trust are two different things, that we're called to give forgiveness instantly. That part's called grace. Forgiveness isn't something you can earn, but trust can't be given. It can only be earned. So forgiveness and trust in many ways are opposite of each other. You need both in a marriage, but forgiveness is given quickly and freely. Trust has to be given slowly and earned. And trust can only be earned by consistency of actions over time. So by the consistency of my actions, I had to earn that back. But it was a long journey. And I share that just because I know so many people watching this are caught up in that same sin right now. She talked about so many being caught up in depression or anxiety. Well, so many are caught up in pornography and maybe justifying it. We hear from a lot of couples that say, no, this spices things up for us. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. But over time, we've seen that pornography, it desensitizes a husband and wife from being able to experience true intimacy. It doesn't, in the long run, bring them closer together. It always finds a way of putting a wedge between them. And so if this is something that's in your marriage, even if it's an open thing you're doing together in your marriage, I strongly encourage you, not just because it's my opinion, but because of the psychology to back it up and because of what God's Word says about it, to remove it from your life, to remove it from your marriage. Because we're called to be not only physically monogamous, but mentally monogamous. And when we will make that our effort, it will do so much to bring us closer and to be able to experience real love, real intimacy, and sex the way it was intended to be enjoyed, in the beautiful way it was intended to be enjoyed. But when we bring in all those outside forces, it does so much to unravel that intimacy.
It does. And I would say this too. If this is you, if you are struggling with anxiety or depression or something that you really haven't told your spouse about yet, or maybe it's a problem that you're dealing with like pornography, you need to come out and bring it in the open, because that's the only way that you guys can truly be there for one another. And it's going to be hard. It's not easy, especially if it's something that you're doing that's wrong. It's going to be hard to admit that, but it's better to do it now than later, because there's going to be more wreckage the longer that you're in the midst of it. And when it comes to something that you're dealing with that you did not necessarily do wrong, but is a deep wound that you're dealing with, the longer that you let it kind of fester in there, the more damage it's going to do to you. So you need to come out with it and tell your spouse whatever's on your mind and heart so that they can help you get the help that you need.
And that leads into our third thing, which is to build your marriage on a foundation of faith. In one of Jesus' most famous teachings, he talks about a wise man who built his house on a rock, and opposed to a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And a storm came and it blew the house on the sand away because it had no foundation. In the same way, marriage needs to be built on a solid foundation. And that foundation includes commitment to one another and commitment to God. I believe that the more you are committed to Him, the stronger your commitment will be to each other.
Right, absolutely. In the Bible, it talks about a cord of 3 strands, how it's God, husband, and wife, and how that's very not easily broken because you're so much stronger with God being at the forefront of your marriage. And how does that look? It's simply by joining a church and reading your Bible together each day, praying together daily. And this doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to use language that you don't normally speak on a daily basis. You know, when you pray together, you just simply are the two of you talking to God together. And I always remind people it's really hard to stay mad at someone and pray for them at the same time.
That's true.
I challenge you to try it, because if you are mad at your spouse, or if your spouse is mad at you, and the two of you come together and you say a short prayer together and you pray for each other, it's really hard to stay mad at each other. And I think it's because of this. I think when we pray together, we're not only humbling ourselves and praying to God, but we're also humbling ourselves towards each other in prayer. And I feel like God does something really amazing there between a husband and a wife when they do pray together. And so I really challenge you to do that and make that a priority every day in your marriage.
Yeah, that's huge. Community of faith, connecting in prayer, those simple things will do wonders to bring you closer together and closer to God in the process. And the fourth and final thing is simply to never give up on each other. So, you know, we've talked about communicating, making communication a daily priority, supporting each other in everything, building on a foundation of faith. And then 4 just talks about persistence and commitment, that really without it, a marriage can't survive. Every time the Bible talks about love, it's almost always in the context of commitment. Our culture has kind of redefined love to just be a feeling that you can fall into or fall out of. But love, the way God intended, is rooted in commitment and action. I mean, Jesus died for us on the cross, and then he says, now I want you to love each other. Husbands, love your wives in that same way that I've loved my church, willing to lay down your life for her. That is a tall order, and it's hard. Sometimes I'm unlovable. I don't know about you. Maybe you're not. Sometimes I'm unlovable. I've got a bunch of gross habits. I do. I've got athlete's foot, and sometimes I'll take my sock off. This is gross. You might want to mute this. But it itches terribly between my toes. And so I'll take my sock off, and I'll do what it's called flossing my toes, all right? I'm going to demonstrate.
Do not demonstrate.
I'll get the sock in between my toes, and I will, floss. It feels amazing, all right? It's the most disgusting thing you've ever seen in your life. This is what this sweet woman has to put up with, one of the many things. And yet she chooses to love me, because love doesn't mean you agree with everything somebody does, but it means your commitment to them is bigger than their quirks, bigger than their flaws, and your commitment to them is going to carry you through. So the couples that make it, they're not the ones who never had a reason to get divorced.
Right.
They're the ones whose commitment to each other was always bigger than their reasons to get divorced.
That's right. There are no marriage experts. We are not marriage experts.
Nope,
sorry. And the reason there are no experts out there when it comes to marriage is because there are no perfect marriages out there. And I take comfort in that, don't you? That means that you're not alone in your struggle. Every marriage goes through struggles. And there may not be perfect marriages out there, but there are strong marriages out there, and you can have a strong marriage too. But it takes giving the time to one another. It takes lots of patience with one another, and it takes communication on a daily basis. But most of all, it takes both of you refusing to give up on one another. No matter if things are so tough or so hard, or your spouse is flossing his feet over here. It doesn't matter.
Guilty.
You gotta dig in and build that foundation of faith on God, and have faith in God and trust in one another. And when you refuse to give up on each other, you are going to have a strong marriage.
You will. And remember, be patient. Love is patient. It's going to take time. And so the hard news is it might take longer than you think to build the marriage you want. But the good news is, if you'll stay the course, I believe your marriage will actually be better than you ever dreamed it could be. And you'll look back years from now and you'll think, we did it. I mean, we are best friends. We're not perfect, because no such thing exists apart from God, but we love being together. We actually like each other. We don't just love each other, we like each other too. And we're having the kind of marriage that makes our kids want to grow up and get married someday. We're enjoying life, and we're continuing to dream through every season of life. We're always looking forward to things ahead, believing our best days are ahead of us and not behind us. And if you will consistently invest into your marriage with time, because that's what it takes, investing time. Time is the currency of your marriage. If you invest time, your marriage will grow. Give the best of yourself to your spouse. Continue to support each other. Continue to love each other. And I believe your marriage is going to continue to grow and thrive until the very, very end. So thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this time with you. Keep fighting for your marriage. We're cheering for you. We're praying for you. And the best days truly are ahead. God bless.